Hello everybody. Today we'll be talking about parasites. What is a parasite? So a parasite is any organism that relies on a host for survival. It usually takes resources from the host and it happens at the expense of the host, oftentimes leading to illness or potentially death. There are three main types of parasites that cause disease specifically in humans. These three are protozoa, helminths, and ectoparasites. Protozoa are a large class of single-celled microscopic organisms that tend to be parasitic in nature but can also be free-living. Protozoa can be transmitted to the host through various routes, which include fecal to oral, as well as person to person, and many of them are transported through a vector. Helminths are large, multicellular organisms that are generally visible to the naked eye in their adult stage. Helminth is the Greek word for worm. Like protozoa, helminths can either be free-living or parasitic. There are three main groups of helminths that enter parasites: tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms. We'll talk more about them later. The third class of parasites are ectoparasites. Ectoparasite literally means any parasite that lives on top of the host, as opposed to within the host. So protozoa and helminths are both endoparasites because they live within the host. But generally speaking, ectoparasites refer to organisms such as ticks, fleas, lice, and mites that attach or burrow into the skin, not very deeply, and remain there for relatively long periods of time. A lot of ectoparasites eat their host's skin, hair, or even drink their blood, and they're specifically adapted to attach and feed for long periods of time. On the left, we can see a helminth, which is this worm over here, and below is a head lice, an example of an ectoparasite. So today I want to tell you guys about some of the cool adaptations that these parasites have evolved that make them uniquely capable of living in hosts. First, we'll talk about protozoa. There's many ways to categorize and type them. The most simplest is by some very strong defining features. So the four that we'll be looking at are Sarcodina, which are otherwise known as amoeba, Masstogophora, or the flagellates, they have flagella, the ciliates, which are defined by having cilia, and Sporozoa. So Sarcodina, or amoeba, are the largest phylum of protists, with over 11,000 discovered species. And this is a gross underestimate of how many exist in nature. At least 7 species are known to parasitize human beings. Amoeba are wildly successful and have been found to parasitize many species of mammals and reptiles. Amoeba are voracious predators existing in microbe-rich terrains like water and soil. Primarily, they're known to feed on bacteria and algal cells and any other microorganism that's in nature. Little is known about Sarcodina in general, and scientists have found them engaging in all types of interesting behavior. On the top right here, we see that this amoeba actually cut open an algal cell and sucks the inside right out. Scientists have also found them farming bacteria, where they consume a bacteria and don't actually digest it. They keep them there, and then they release them inside of a new spot where they want them to start growing for later consumption. So they're very interesting and not very well understood. The defining feature of amoeba is their amoeboid movement. Essentially, they can crawl along surfaces without the use of cilia or flagella. The way they do this is by changing the shape of their body. They use actin filaments to create extrusions called pseudopodia, or false feet. The actin filaments push out their cell membranes, creating little knobs or feet, and as they stretch out, the cytoplasm flows into the feet, allowing the entire amoeba to follow and move as a result. Another interesting fact about amoeba is that some undergo assisted fission, meaning that when they replicate, the two resulting daughter cells are actually still attached by what is called a tether, and surrounding amoeba actually recognize this and come over and pull apart the newly created daughter cells and assist them in fission. The amoeba that most commonly parasitizes humans is Entamoeba histolytica. It digests epithelial cells of the intestine, causing dysentery and eventually death if left untreated. In the worst case scenario, this parasite can travel to the liver through the bloodstream and start digesting the liver, causing amoebic liver abscess. A combination of antibiotics and amoebicides are used to stop the infection. These parasites are spread to humans through the fecal-oral route, meaning that the best way to prevent infection is by avoiding consumption of food and water that has become contaminated by the amoeba. Another very well-known parasitic amoeba is Naegleria fowleri, otherwise known as the brain-eating amoeba. Normally these amoeba eat microbes, however they can enter the human brain through the nose. After entering, they enjoy consuming neurons and other cells that make up brain tissue. What's surprising and interesting is that people with defective immune systems actually have less severe fowleri infections. This is because the amoeba can recognize when it's being attacked by immune cells and actually becomes even more aggressive. Furthermore, without a strong immune response, the brain does not become as swollen or inflamed. So modern medicine now uses immunosuppressants to help treat a fowleri infection. In this video, we'll be able to observe the amoeboid movement, and it's quite fascinating. So these three things right here that you can see are actually pseudopodia, and you can see the protoplasm start to flow into the pseudopodia after they expand. And then the rest of the amoeba follows behind. And with this motion, they're able to actually be quite motile. Next, we'll talk about Masstogophora, which are characterized by their flagella. This includes the subgroups Fornicata, Parabasilia, and Euglenzoa. So because many of these organisms have evolved alongside of their hosts that they infect, they actually have limited metabolic activity, which is very interesting to observe. So for example, Fornicata lack mitochondria altogether, and Parabasilia have modified mitochondria called kinetoplasts, which are not able to carry out all the normal functions of a true mitochondria. So these organisms rely on their host for many necessary metabolic products. Parabasilia are very successful parasites and are known to parasitize virtually every animal group, as well as plants and insects. A closely related genus of parasites, called trypanosomes, are responsible for causing African sleeping sickness, otherwise known as trypanosomiasis. This disease is transmitted through the tsetse fly, which bites humans. And cases of African sleeping sickness actually spiked around 1998, with about 500,000 cases reported every year. Thanks to the efforts of the World Health Organization, there has been less than 10,000 cases as of 2009. Leishmaniasis, which is a neglected tropical disease, is caused by a very closely related group of Masstogophora called Leishmania. There's actually over 20 species of Leishmania that are known to cause leishmaniasis and parasitize humans. This disease currently affects about 12 million people and is responsible for 50,000 deaths every year. The primary vector for leishmaniasis is sandflies. Moving on. Now we'll talk about the apicomplexans, also known as Plasmodium. These are super interesting parasites, and I think they're my favorite out of the parasites that I'll be talking about today. They're intracellular parasites, meaning that they can actually live within the host cells, and they're known for having the apical complex, which can be seen at the right. This is an amazing piece of machinery that has been developed by evolution, and essentially the apical complex is a concentration of organelles, vacuoles, and microtubules that will allow the parasite to very easily disrupt cell membranes and enter directly into the host cell. All species of Plasmodia are parasites, and there's many species within the genus Plasmodium that cause malaria. So Plasmodia has a very complex life cycle, but it's primarily transmitted to humans through female mosquito bites. An estimated 300 million people in over 90 countries are infected with malaria, and over 1 million die from it each year. Another apicomplexan is Cryptosporidium. It's responsible for causing the disease in humans, cryptosporidiosis. This is transmitted to humans usually through drinking water, but mostly through public pools, and it causes severe diarrhea. The last one I'll talk about today is Toxoplasma gondii, which is a very common parasite. It infects nearly 40 million people just in the United States. However, most people with healthy immune systems do not become severely ill, and thus it goes unnoticed, and really you'd only know if you were infected if you were immunocompromised. Now let's talk about helminths, or parasitic worms. There are a plethora of different species of parasitic worms that infect humans. The three main categories are tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms, and I'll give you one example of each. An example of tapeworm is the pork tapeworm. As the name suggests, pork tapeworms are usually contracted from eating undercooked pork. This infection is particularly nasty because the cyst, or the larval form of the worm, has a particular liking for human brains. And brain infections by the cyst are the leading cause of seizures worldwide. Apart from seizures, it can cause a plethora of issues, including lesions, blindness, paraplegia, and death. Schistosomiasis is the name of the infection that results from being infected by the fluke Schistosoma mansoni. The worm can live in the intestines and urinary tract, where it causes kidney failure, abdominal pain, and liver damage. It can also cause the swelling of the stomach, as seen here in this photo, and it's commonly contracted from swimming in freshwater lakes, The reason why is because the reservoir for schistosoma are freshwater snails. The larvae of the worm develop in freshwater snails where they grow, and then they end up leaving the snail and search for mammals to infect. So the mature larva can only survive outside of the snail for 48 hours. If it doesn't find a mammal to infect before then, it will die in the water. While majority of cases of schistosomiasis occur in Africa, there's actually a case in Germany where a man got schistosoma infection from an infected snail in his aquarium. The last type of helminth I'll talk about are hookworms. This is a picture of a hookworm in the top right. And hookworms are an example of roundworms. Unlike all other worms, they do not infect humans by being ingested. Instead, hookworm larvae can directly penetrate our skin. So very commonly you can contract hookworms from walking barefoot through like some muddy areas. And the actual process of infection is really quite amazing. They go through the skin and enter the bloodstream, and then from the bloodstream they travel up to the lungs where they like come out of the bloodstream, and once they're in the lungs, the larvae are actually coughed up and then swallowed. And they end up in your intestines where they molt and mature into adults. So some hookworms have been recorded living up to 15 years within their host, and they're able to sexually reproduce while inside of their host. I hope you all have learned about some of the amazing adaptations that parasites have developed to live in their environments. Although a lot of what I talked about can seem scary, humans have actually managed to take advantage of some of these adaptations to better our own quality of life. One example of this is the use of leeches in modern medicine. Leeches have an anesthetic that stops their host from feeling the leech, and they also have an anti-coagulating agent in their saliva. So modern medicine has taken advantage of this and uses them to numb pain, reduce swelling, and keep blood flowing into surgically reattached limbs. Maggots have also been used by modern medicine to debride wounds and clean up infections. This is because maggots only feast on dead tissue, so they leave all the healthy tissue alone. Thanks to leeches and maggots, we've been able to save limbs that would otherwise have to be amputated. As can be seen in the photo on the bottom right, after the treatment, all of the dead tissue is gone, leaving just healthy tissue. It has also been found that parasitic worms, just like the ones that I talked about earlier, release a very powerful immunosuppressant that essentially helps them live in the intestine without being detected by your immune system. And so we can use these worms to help patients that have overactive immune systems and autoimmune disorders. Thank you.